What Vikings did to traitors. Gunnar's voice trailed off as if his own mouth refused to finish the sentence. He crouched by the hearth, elbows on knees, the firelight licking the curve of his cheekbone, casting his face in twin masks of shadow and flame. The rest of the longhouse was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses cloth against the mouth of the world, muffled, thick, breathless. The logs crackled. Pine resin hissed from a split in the timber. Someone shifted on the straw behind him, drawing up a hide blanket. Wind groaned along the roof beams like a dying ox. Outside, the night sagged heavy with snow. The thatch above was already crusted white. Each gust heaved drifts against the walls, whispering down through the chinks in the beams like spirits fumbling for a voice. His brother Torbjörn didn't speak. He sat across from Gunnar, wetting the edge of a broad sayax with the kind of patience born only from grief. The stone dragged in a slow rhythm, not hurried, not purposeful, just necessary. Steel had to be sharp, even if it would never be used again. Gunnar's eyes didn't leave the fire. They didn't scream, he said quietly. Not even when their ribs were pulled wide. A silence followed that landed hard between them. Torbjörn wiped the blade against his thigh and stared. They'd already left their bodies. No man can stay inside the flesh when it's open like that. He wasn't talking about animals. Behind them, the longhouse was a tomb of sleeping warriors, old and young, layered in furs and wine-sour breath. No song tonight, no boasting. Not after what they saw beyond the ridge, where the trees grew black and the snow turned green under the moon. One of the younger men had carved runes into the bench with a fishbone. They curled like knots of fate, sharp and half-finished. The boy hadn't returned. Neither had Jorund. A wisp of wind pushed at the oiled hide over the door. It flapped once, slow and uncertain. Gunnar's fingers twitched near the hilt of his axe. Not in fear, not quite, but from something older than fear. That cold instinct that made ravens leave trees before arrows flew. The kind of feeling men didn't speak of during summer raids. The kind of feeling they could only name in winter. Torbjörn muttered something under his breath. It sounded like a line from a funeral chant, but Gunnar couldn't catch it. His brother looked thinner in the firelight, not just lean from travel, but stripped, like too much spirit had leaked out his pores and hadn't returned. His lips were cracked. One eye was red-rimmed. His hands never stopped moving, fingers rolling the whetstone again. They had marched north 3 weeks earlier. 80 men, 4 sleds, and 24 hounds. Chasing whispers of fur-rich tundra people who traded silver for musk glands and made fishbone armor too fine for the eye to catch. The Biamians, they were called. A name passed through merchant mouths like steam. Always half-vanished, never quite real. Until the scouts vanished. Until horses limped back alone. Until the trees started watching. Egil said he saw her again last night, Gunnar said suddenly, eyes still in the fire. Said she had no face. Torbjörn's mouth tightened. He didn't answer. She just stood in the trees, Gunnar went on, the words spilling because silence had grown unbearable. White cloak, bone jewelry, nothing behind the eyes but ash. Torbjörn grunted. Egil also pisses himself when a squirrel chatters. But they both knew Egil hadn't screamed when he vanished. Only the sound of snow shifting. Then, nothing. They left Jorund's boots standing, Gunnar whispered, like the wind might hear. Perfect, upright, laced, no feet in them. The hearth popped, throwing a spray of sparks. Gunnar blinked and leaned back, brushing ash off his sleeve. A slow tread approached the door. Leather creaked under weight. It was the kind of sound men remembered from deep raids. The moment before a gate was breached, when every heartbeat slammed like a war drum in the skull. A shape pressed against the hide flap. A grunt. Snow slushed. Then the flap lifted, and old Håkon entered, pulling the storm behind him like a curse. His beard was frozen stiff, ice hooked along his mustache. He slammed the door with one gnarled hand and stomped the snow off his boots with the other. He didn't greet anyone. He didn't look at the fire. He stared at Torbjorn. 2 more gone. Torbjorn stood. Falki and Stig, Håkon muttered. No blood, no prints, just rope, hanging in the wind. Gunnar frowned. Rope? A net, Håkon said, like for catching fish, but made of sinew, hung between 2 birches. Torbjorn's face was flat. They were scouts. They were bait. Gunnar swore under his breath and turned his face from the fire. His hands shook slightly. He rubbed them on his thighs, but the tremor didn't fade. Not wolves, Håkon added. Not frost, not madness. This is design. This is theater. Torbjorn nodded once and reached for his cloak. We ride at dawn. No, Håkon said. You don't. Silence, the kind that sucked the air from the room. You'll go now. Torbjorn frowned. There's no light. There's no time. Gunnar looked at them both. Are we still hunting fur? He asked bitterly. Håkon didn't answer, but the look in his eyes said no. They weren't hunting anything now. They were surviving something. Or trying to. Gunnar stood slowly, as though his legs remembered things he didn't want to recall. The way bodies hung from branches. The way the snow smelled after fire arrows cut down 2 men who tried to run. Not smoke, not ash, but burned meat. The kind that shouldn't come from a man's chest. They dressed in silence. Fur cloaks, iron amulets, wolf-hide gloves. Belts strung with sayax and axe and horn. Outside, the world was all white breath and black trees. The moon was bone bright. The air stung the nostrils, the kind of cold that dries the eyes and bites the teeth. They passed under snow-laden boughs, the trees groaning like ships in ice. The sled dogs stirred but didn't bark. Their ears flattened. Their noses trembled. Instinct again. A shape moved to Gunnar's right. He froze, but it was just Sigrid, Håkon's daughter, bow in hand, eyes rimmed with soot. She didn't look at them. She stared into the forest like she had roots there. She's been out all night, Håkon said. Torbjorn narrowed his eyes. Doing what? She listens, better than the gods. Gunnar looked away. He'd never liked Sigrid. Too quiet, too still. She wore the pelt of a snow lynx around her shoulders and moved like mist. The other women called her Skuggadrottning, Queen of Shadows. Sigrid stepped forward and pointed to the northern rise. They want you to follow. Who? Gunnar asked. She didn't answer. Torbjorn nodded once. Then we follow. The climb was steep. Snow crusted under their boots, crunching soft with each step. No trails, no tracks, just the faint echo of their own breath and the squeak of leather straps. The trees thinned, the wind thickened. Shadows bent oddly in the moonlight, too long, too curved. The cold sucked into their joints like wet fingers. They reached the ridge. Below, nestled between 2 frozen streams, stood a circle of birches. In the center, a single pole of carved spruce crowned with a deer skull. Around it, 8 mounds of snow, unmoving. Gunnar's stomach tightened. Burials? He asked. No, said Sigrid. Watchers. The wind died, and in that moment of silence a horn blew. Not theirs, not Norse. It came from the trees beyond the mounds, low, guttural, carved of something deeper than air. Then the mounds moved, slowly, like breathing. Gunnar stepped back. 1 mound stood. Snow fell away, revealing bone armor, fur leggings, and a mask of carved bark shaped like a stag's face. Antlers jagged, eyes hollow, mouth aslit. The others rose. Torbjorn didn't speak. His jaw set. Håkon whispered, The Biamians. One of the masked figures lifted a hand, not in greeting, in judgment. And that was when Gunnar realized. None of these warriors carried blades. They didn't need them. The traitors had brought blades, and they would answer for it. The snow behind them shifted again. A second circle. Closing. The first circle closed with silence. The second closed with snow. Gunnar's heel struck something. Not a stone, not ice. Soft. Hollow. He looked down and his breath seized in his throat. A ribcage, not buried, arranged. Bleached white and laid open like a cradle, the bones curved upward, cupping the sky like hands holding a secret. No flesh, no grave scent, just clean bone, wired with braided sinew. A display, not a corpse. A message. Torbjorn didn't flinch. His gaze stayed fixed on the figures below. The Biamians stood unmoving, 8 of them, still as icons. The pole in their midst bore more than the deer skull now. Blood streaked the grooves in the carved spruce, thick and black as pitch in the moonlight. Gunnar hadn't seen it before. Had it always been there? Sigrid was the first to move. She stepped forward, one boot in the snow, the other in the ribs, and passed between the birch trunks as if she belonged to both worlds. Her lynx pelt dragged slightly behind her, whispering in the crusted snow. She didn't speak. She didn't ask. She just walked toward the masks. Torbjorn hissed, but not loud. She's mad. Hakon's eyes glimmered under his frost-stiff hood. She was chosen. For what? Gunnar snapped, but the old man didn't answer. Not with words. Instead, he reached into his tunic and pulled free a small amulet. No Thor's hammer, no Freya's knot. This was something older. A ring of carved horn, etched with dots and slashes in a pattern Gunnar didn't know. The shape pulsed in the firelight like a second heartbeat. She bears the debt, Hakon muttered. We made trade without right, blood without gift. They came to the winter market, and we came with swords. Gunnar felt heat crawl up his spine, unnatural in that cold. That wasn't betrayal, he said, but it came out too fast, too thin. Wasn't it? Hakon's eyes didn't blink. Below, Sigrid stopped. She stood 5 paces from the Biamian circle, arms at her sides, her chin lifted. The nearest figure, the stag-faced one, moved. Slowly, purposefully. He walked toward her, fur brushing against his bark armor, antlers catching the light. He stopped in front of her and turned. Not to her, to the ridge, to them, and raised one hand again, palm outward. It was not a threat. It was not a welcome. It was something else entirely. A test. Torbjorn took a breath like drawing a knife, but Hakon's hand was already on his shoulder. You do not raise steel, the old man said. They do not strike first. It is their law. Gunnar stared at the pole. The blood had thickened. But no body hung there. Not yet. They began to descend. The 3 of them, step by step. Torbjorn first, eyes forward, fists clenched. Gunnar next, shoulders tight as leather drawcords. Hakon last, slower, leaning into the slope like it was older than his spine. They passed the ribcage. They passed Sigrid. They entered the birch circle. And the sound vanished. No wind, no breath. Not even the rustle of fur against bark. Gunnar's ears rang in the vacuum. The Biamians did not move. Their masks were not uniform. One bore the face of a fox, jaws open and curled with stylized fangs. Another was a raven, black feathers stitched into the rim of its wooden crest. A third had no animal at all, just bone-white smoothness, blank as snow. A mirror of what wasn't there. The stag face reached to his side and drew out a bundle, wrapped in bark cloth, tied with gut string, small, no weapon. He stepped forward and held it toward Sigrid. She took it without hesitation, unwrapped it with cold fingers. Inside, a severed tongue, dried. flat, curled slightly at the tip like a leaf in drought. Sigrid didn't flinch. She looked up and met the eyes behind the mask, whatever eyes might be there, and nodded once. Torbjörn let out a slow breath through his nose. "Whose?" he whispered. Gunnar didn't answer. He couldn't. Sigrid turned and handed the tongue to Håkon. He took it. He didn't look at it. He walked to the spruce pole and pressed the tongue against the blood-grooved trunk. The grooves pulsed. Not literally, but Gunnar could have sworn the wood darkened. Something moved behind the Biamians. More figures. But these weren't warriors. They were taller, thinner, cloaked in moss and birch bark and fur stitched with teeth. No masks, only paint. Faces smeared with red and ash, lines drawn across cheeks and over brows. Women. 3 of them. One held a staff of twisted root. One held a horn made from a walrus tusk. The last held a mirror of polished black stone. Torbjörn's jaw set hard. "They bring their witches." Gunnar said nothing. He looked at their feet, bare, cracked, frostbitten, and then back at their faces. One of them smiled. Not cruelly, but knowingly. The staff-bearer stepped into the circle and spoke. Not Norse, not Sami, not anything Gunnar knew. It was low and rhythmic, like stone grinding on stone, vowels drawn long and slow like winter breath. Then she stopped, and pointed, at Torbjörn. Håkon whispered something under his breath. The staff-bearer beckoned. Torbjörn did not move. "Don't," Gunnar muttered, but the ground behind them cracked. Not loudly, just enough. Enough to remind them that there was no behind anymore, only forward. Torbjörn stepped into the inner ring. The warriors parted. The witches waited. Gunnar's heart pounded. He wanted to call out, to curse, to demand terms. But something, ancient, embedded, more sacred than the gods they carved into ship posts, held his tongue. Torbjörn stood in front of the women. They circled him once. Staff, horn, mirror. Each paused behind him in turn. Then the one with the mirror lifted it toward the moon. And the wind returned. Hard, cold, filled with a sound Gunnar had never heard before. The exact pitch of a scream swallowed before it could escape the chest. Like breath caught in ribs that never opened again. The horn-bearer lifted the tusk and blew. A low note. Flat. Thick. A foghorn in a forest. And then, Gunnar's vision tilted, not outward, inward. The trees spun, his knees gave. He caught himself, but everything felt wrong. The air thick, too thick. Torbjörn stumbled. The horn blared again. The staff struck the ground, and the snow rose, from everywhere, as if it had breath, as if the very ground wanted to speak. It curled upward, a white mist of tiny frozen flakes, dancing in spirals around the pole, around the warriors, around Torbjörn. The mirror caught the moonlight and flared. Torbjörn dropped to one knee. His axe fell from his hand. Gunnar lunged forward, but 2 of the masked warriors stepped between them. Not aggressively, not even quickly, just with the finality of tide meeting shore. Sigrid's voice cut through the air. "Do not interrupt. This is not punishment." Gunnar stared at her. He's not guilty. Her face was unreadable. He carries what was done. That's not the same. It is to them. Torbjörn gasped. His back arched. His arms clawed the air. He fell, flat, face to sky. The mirror-bearer knelt beside him. Placed the stone over his heart. The horn blew one last time. And then, stillness. The wind stopped. The snow dropped. The moon dimmed. And Torbjörn sat up, slowly. He looked around. His breath clouded in front of him. His eyes were wide, not wild. Open. Clearer than Gunnar had seen them since the raids. He looked at the witches. then at Gunnar, then down at his own hands. He picked up his axe, not to raise it, to hold it, like a child might hold a father's blade for the first time. And then he stood, and turned, and walked, not back to the Norsemen, not to Gunnar, but between the birches, into the woods. Sigrid did not follow. The witches turned as one and vanished behind the warriors, and the stag-faced figure raised his hand once more, then lowered it. The circle broke. The Biamians turned away, one by one, fading into the trees like shadows soaked into bark. Gunnar remained rooted. Only when Hakon placed a hand on his arm did he breathe again. It is done. What did they do? They took the part that would have killed him, and left what could survive. Gunnar looked at the snow where Torbjorn had lain. A spiral of frost lay etched around it, sharp, clean, deep, like a rune, a mark of passage, not of guilt, but of price. They turned back toward the ridge. No one spoke. Behind them, the trees closed. Ahead of them, wind whispered through the ribs, and the taste of bloodless judgment lingered on their tongues. Snow moved like breath again, slow and unhurried, across the ridge as Gunnar climbed. The wind had returned, not as the lash it had been the night before, but as something older and quieter, slipping through branches like a name half-remembered. He didn't speak. Neither did Hakon. Neither did Sigrid. The world behind them was gone. They did not speak of Torbjorn. To do so would be to say that the man who had walked into the forest was still Torbjorn. And none of them believed that. Not truly. Not after the mirror. Not after the horn. At the edge of the clearing, the sled dogs whined. The men left at the longhouse had not slept. 2 fires still burned low. Shadows moved behind animal hides. They waited. Not as warriors wait before a raid, but as cattle wait when the wolves grow too bold. A fear that had no weapon. Egil was the first to stand. His face cracked with sleep, his eyes red from smoke. He looked at Gunnar, just a glance, and then quickly away. Others followed, 9 in all. Once they had been 80. Now they did not fill even one circle of stones. "What did they say?" someone asked, though no one replied. Gunnar crouched near the fire. His fingers opened stiffly, cracked at the joints. He didn't look up. "They didn't speak," Hakon finally answered. "They judged." Egil spat. "By what law?" Sigrid's head turned, slow as frost. "By law older than the whale road, older than Odin's eye." Egil's lips curled. "We should have brought fire, burned their idols, taken their pelts, and fed their witches to the dogs." Sigrid did not answer, but the dogs, as if hearing their name twisted with poison, backed from Egil and hid behind the sleds. Hakon rose. There will be no fire, no raid, no blades drawn. Gunnar stared into the coals. They pulsed dim and deep, not warm, just alive. "We return," Hakon said. Egil's laugh cracked like ice under a boot. "Return? What? As ghosts? As men who live. I did not come this far to trade stories of masks and dead brothers." "No," Gunnar murmured. "You came for silver. You came to slit bellies for musk and return home with your beard oiled and your fingers drunk. But now you shake when a tree creaks." Egil's nostrils flared. "Say that again." Gunnar looked up. "You heard me." The air tensed, not just in the lungs of men, but in the sinew of the longhouse walls, in the grain of the axes leaning near the benches, in the way the dogs did not bark, but no one drew. The tension broke in silence. Egil turned, cursed, and stomped away. No one followed. Outside, the snow began again. Soft, steady. It was a snowfall that knew its work. They packed with haste. Not like warriors breaking camp, but like thieves returning stolen breath to a place they'd robbed. No one sang. not even when the sleds creaked into the trees. Gunnar walked near the front. His breath came slow. He no longer saw the trees as trees. Each trunk might have eyes. Each bent branch a bow drawn behind bark. He did not flinch, but he did not forget. They moved south, into thicker woods. The landscape changed, not drastically, but with a creeping familiarity. The light filtered more freely here. Birds returned to the air, but not the birds Gunnar wanted. No ravens, no crows, only the small brown ones that dart from pine to pine and say nothing of death. Midday came. They did not stop. Midday passed. They did not eat. Somewhere between the river bend and the shale hill, the sled halted. One of the rear scouts had not returned. "Alrik," Egil muttered. "He rode behind me." Gunnar turned. "How long?" "An hour, maybe more." Håkon said nothing. No one offered to search. Then, as if from the trees themselves, came a shape. Not running, not limping, walking. It was Alrik, but his hands were tied, not in front, not behind, to his neck. Each wrist lashed to the collarbone with sinew. His head hung forward, slack, like a wolf that knows the axe has already kissed its throat. Gunnar stepped forward, but Sigrid stopped him. "Don't." He looked at her, and for a moment, all the fury of Snowfire raged behind his eyes. "Why?" he snapped. She pointed, not to Alrik, to the air. It shimmered, not like heat, like mist, and behind it, shapes, not visible, not definite, but there, watching, waiting. Gunnar stepped back. Alrik continued to walk, each step deliberate, measured. Then, without looking up, he opened his mouth, and from it fell a stone, just one, oval, black, smooth as river glass. It hit the snow, did not bounce, did not roll, did not melt. Sigrid knelt, lifted it, held it to her forehead, whispered something. And then, without looking at Alrik again, she stood and walked past him. Alrik did not follow. He stood, breathing, then turned and walked back into the woods. None followed. None called out. Gunnar's voice broke the silence. What did it mean? Sigrid's eyes didn't meet his. He was told something. Something for him. And something for us. What? They're done warning us. Even Egil said nothing. They moved on. But something was different now. Not just fear. It was a sense of ritual. Of theater. Every footstep felt too loud. Every branch too deliberate. Every gust of wind like breath blown by a watching mouth. The Biamians were not gone. They were staging. And that changed everything. That night they camped near the edge of a frozen lake. The sky was clear. Too clear. Stars pricked the black like arrowheads hung from nothing. The moon had thinned to a cruel hook. Gunnar could not sleep. He walked the shore, boots crunching over crusted frost, eyes darting to each ripple in the trees. And then, a sound, not far, not animal. Voices, low. He followed, carefully. At the edge of a small rise, he crouched. Below, a clearing. Small, ringed by spears dug blade first into the ground. At the center, a woman. One of the Biamians, not masked. Her hair was long and pale, nearly white, braided with bone beads. She knelt beside a mound of furs, unwrapping, layer by layer, until a shape emerged. It was a corpse, but not fresh, not rotted either. Preserved, mummified, wrapped in birch bark and wool, eyes covered in coins, mouth stitched shut with sinew. She bowed her head over it and began to hum, low, hollow, a song without rhythm, a song that had no beginning, a song that felt like it had always been singing. Behind her, 2 other women stood guard. They held staffs carved with animal figures, wolf, bear, owl. The owl turned, saw Gunnar, but did not call out. did not move, just watched. And Gunnar understood. This was not a place of war. This was a place of memory, of invocation. The Biamians were not preparing for battle. They were speaking to the dead, not to raise them, but to listen. He backed away, careful, slow. The owl woman's gaze followed, but nothing stopped him. He returned to camp as dawn broke. The fire was out. Only Hakon sat awake. He looked at Gunnar and nodded once. "They keep their past above the ground," Gunnar murmured. Hakon stirred the ashes with a stick. "We bury ours and hope it forgets us." Sigrid rose from sleep. She held the black stone in her hand. It had changed color. Now gray, like ash cooled. "They've chosen," she said. "Chosen what?" Gunnar asked. She turned. Where to make their stand? The trees thinned to the south, giving way to a wide white hollow shaped like a cupped palm. Snow lay thick and undisturbed across it, smooth as stretched hide, save for one narrow trail, not carved by sled, not stamped by boots. A single shallow groove etched through the drifts in a perfect spiral. Not a hunting trail, not a path of travel. A symbol. Drawn on a scale no hand could see whole from the ground. They stood at its edge, ringed by skeletal birches bent under their own frost, their branches like hands too brittle to hold anything for long. The morning air was brittle and sharp. It pierced furs, seized lungs, clung behind the eyes like grief. Sigrid pointed to the center of the hollow, where a black post rose from the snow. "Here," she said. Egil stepped forward. "There's nothing here but wood and wind." She didn't answer. She simply moved into the hollow, careful not to step into the spiral groove. Her feet landed soft. Her breath fogged and vanished. The post rose ahead, twice her height, carved from ironwood, burnt black, capped with something flat. Not a symbol, not a god. A table. Gunnar stared. Not of feasting, not of offering. An execution table. Iron nails rose from its surface. Long, uneven, bent at angles, some wrapped with gut string, others hung with strips of dried hide. Too pale for deer. The air turned heavier, denser. Hakon joined them. "They've built their ground," he said quietly. "This is where they speak without words." The wind answered. Not in sound, but in smell. Pine tar, charred bone, fermented blood. Gunnar turned away from the pole. Beyond the hollow, on a ledge of stone half swallowed by snow, something glinted. He stepped toward it. Snow crunched once, twice beneath his boots, then silence. Then sound. Not footsteps, not speech. Drums, not many, just two. Low. So low he felt it in his gut before he heard it. Like the beat of a heart larger than any beast. One on the left, one on the right. He turned. The ridges were no longer empty. From behind the trees they came. First the women, 6 of them, cloaked in smoke-stained wool, feathers plaited into their braids. Each bore a mask of carved bark painted white. No eyes, no mouths. Just runes etched across the surface. None Norse. None he recognized. Then the men, not warriors, not berserks, hunters, but not with bows. Each carried a staff wrapped in red cloth, knotted tightly at one end. They moved in formation, evenly spaced, deliberately slow. Snow did not stick to them. Cold did not bite them. They were made for this place. The drums grew louder. No hand struck them. The beat came from the earth itself. Gunnar felt his knees tighten, as if something deep below had set the rhythm and now waited for his bones to match. Sigrid knelt before the execution post. She did not speak. A woman stepped forward from the group, taller than the others, maskless. Gray streaks marked her hair, not old, not young. Her eyes were dark, not black but hollow, wide, as if her pupils never closed. She carried no weapon, only a rope. Behind her, Alric, his wrists still bound to his neck, his face blank. He walked as if underwater. Sigrid rose and backed away. The woman, priestess, judge, or executioner, did not speak. She laid the rope on the nails of the post. One loop, two, a third. She waited. No signal was given. And yet, from behind, two hunters stepped forward, unwrapped their staffs, and revealed skinning knives. Long, hooked, shaped not to stab, but to unmake. Gunnar's hand moved to his axe. Hakon grabbed his arm. "No," he said. "This is not for us." "He's ours," Gunnar hissed. "No longer." He stepped into their pattern. They warned him. He returned. Egil snarled. "He's not even speaking." "He doesn't need to," said Sigrid. The priestess turned, faced Alric. She reached for his face. He didn't flinch. Her thumb smeared ash across his brow. Then she stepped back, and the two hunters advanced. Gunnar couldn't look away. The first cut wasn't deep, not meant to kill, just to open, to begin. The knives worked in silence. The only sound the whistle of snow across the nails and the slow, sticky tear of cloth and flesh. They did not rush. They did not pause. Each cut followed another, not at random, but with order. As if his body had become a map, and they traced roads no Norseman knew. Alric did not scream. His lips parted once, but no sound came. He did not fall. Even when his knees bent, the rope held him upright. The spiral in the snow darkened as drops fell, not splattered, but gathered. A slow bloom. By the time the knives stopped, he was no longer a man in the shape of Alric. He was only motion, breath, memory. The priestess lifted a clay bowl from the snow, collected the blood, and poured it into a hollow carved into the earth beneath the pole. The snow didn't drink it. The ground did. The drums stopped, not faded, stopped, as if a hand had crushed the pulse of the world. Then, and only then, did Alric fall. No cry, just a thud. The rope held the upper half of his body aloft. His head sagged. The hunters turned, vanished behind the birches. The priestess stepped forward, lifted her eyes to the gathered Norse. She spoke, in their tongue, but not in their sound. Her voice was thick, syllables clipped, a dialect not heard from any traitor or northern clan. He bore the unreturned gift. The price is taken. Then silence. Gunnar stepped forward. "Why him?" he asked. The priestess tilted her head. "He knew." "Knew what?" "That your blades cut through treaty, not enemy. That your silver bought silence, not peace. He ate the meat they offered, then brought iron." Egil spat. "He was following orders." "No," the priestess said, and her voice cut cleaner than the knives. "He was afraid, and in fear he chose cowardice, not resistance, not protest, but the kind that does not speak, the kind that nods while the dagger hides behind the thigh." Sigrid closed her eyes. The priestess looked at her. "You are not him." Then at Gunnar, "You are not free." And then she turned away. The spiral began to collapse. Not with snow, with fog, from the ground, white and curling, like breath exhaled by the earth itself. The figures vanished, one by one. No hurry, no haste, just absence. By the time the fog reached the execution post, only the priestess remained. She stood. One last glance, not at Gunnar, not at Sigrid, at Egil, and then she was gone. The fog swallowed the pole, swallowed the blood, swallowed the shape of Alric's ruin. By the time the sun sank below the pines, the hollow was empty. No trail, no spiral, no nails, just snow and the wind and one bone, one thumb bone, clean, polished, resting in the center of where the spiral had once begun. Gunnar picked it up. It was warm. The bone remained warm long after the snow took Alric's breath. Gunnar held it without thinking, turning it over in his palm as if its heat might tell him something. Not the way a fire speaks, but the way an ember remembers. It wasn't charred, not stained. A clean thumb bone, polished with oil or time, edges worn as if rubbed by prayer. No one spoke of it. They left the hollow in silence, each step away from the execution ground heavier than the one before. The fog didn't follow. It didn't need to. The fog had never belonged to the wind. It had belonged to them. Sigrid walked ahead now. Not leading, not guiding, but drawn, like a needle pulled by iron hidden beneath the earth. They didn't make camp. They walked until the sky bled violet and blue, until even the frost on the branches seemed to look away. When they stopped, it wasn't by decision. Their knees buckled and dropped them beside a frozen stream. A circle formed around nothing. No fire, no light. Just breath, and the closeness of those still counted among the living. Gunnar watched the bone. He didn't know why he hadn't left it. The idea of discarding it felt wrong, not cursed, not sacred, but intimate. It had been chosen. It had been left. Why? Across from him, Egil sat with his back to a fallen spruce. He sharpened his knife slowly, even though it had dulled against nothing. His eyes were narrowed to slits, his shoulders hunched, lips twitching without sound. Something had changed in him after the execution. Or perhaps something had surfaced. Gunnar didn't ask. He slept with the bone clenched in his fist. The next morning it had cooled. But the spiral on its surface, thin, faint, etched in lines no deeper than fingernail scratches, had not been there the night before. Hakon saw it and said nothing. Sigrid glanced once. "Wyatt is watching," she murmured. They moved again, south, toward warmth, toward trade routes, toward escape. But nothing felt farther. The trees no longer bent overhead like shelter. They pressed inward. Each clearing opened like a mouth. Each ridge loomed like a brow above judging eyes. 3 days passed. They ate dry meat. They drank melted snow. They said little. On the 4th day, they reached the old black road, the ridge path where merchants once crossed from the fjords to the inland tribes, through pine country and Owl Hill. The stones were still there, half buried, the old travel markers made from iron slag and carved whalebone. Once, this path had meant trade, passage, silver. Now it meant return. They followed it, and the silence followed them. It broke only once, in the middle of the second night, with screaming. Not an attack, not an ambush. Egil. He'd torn his furs open, flailing at his chest, his mouth foamed, eyes wide, pupils full moon. The dogs barked and scattered. He convulsed near the fire, his limbs jerking like a netted fish. Gunnar and 2 others pinned him. Sigrid crouched beside him, staring not at his face, but at his hands. He was clenching something, a scrap of linen, wrapped around a coin, carved bone, same as the thumb, another token. Sigrid took it. He stopped, like a fire smothered. Egil blinked, mouth hanging open, breathing wet and shallow. He slept after that, did not rise the next morning, would not speak. They carried him on the sled. He did not resist. His knife was gone. No one had seen who took it. That day they reached the boundary stones of the southern forest. The snow lightened, the sky brightened, and yet nothing lifted. The dread did not melt with the frost. It only stretched. Hakon stood beside the stones. His hand touched the carved runes. Old Norse, half-worn, faded by wind. Here ends the wild. Here begins the known. But that was a lie. What lay behind them had never been wild. It had been deliberate, known. They were the ones who didn't understand. They were the ones who had entered sacred ground like raiders instead of guests. They crossed into farmland, sparse at first, just birch-fenced grazing pastures, huts blackened by smoke, cow tracks frozen in the mud. No people, just distance. By dusk, they reached a village. They didn't shout. They didn't knock. The gates opened before them like the mouths of kin who fear the story but know it must be heard. The chieftain there was a one-eyed man named Stenvor, old enough to remember the failed eastern raids and young enough to still wear steel. He welcomed them into the hall with no question, no delay. They warmed by the hearth. They drank broth. They did not speak of the Biamians, not yet. But the questions came in silence. Children stared at the torn furs. Women stared at the missing faces. One by one, they retired. All but Gunnar, Sigrid, and Hakon. And Egil, who sat still, eyes focused not on the fire, but on the wall beyond it, as if waiting for it to open. Stenvor refilled his horn and leaned forward. "What did you find in the White Forest?" No one answered. He narrowed his eye. "Did you find what you sought? Silver? Musk? Pelt?" Gunnar's mouth opened, but Sigrid spoke first. "We found a mirror." Stenvor frowned. "A looking glass?" "No," she said. "A law." He leaned back. She set the two bones on the hearthstone, thumb and token, and turned them slowly until the spirals aligned. The hearth cracked. Not loudly, just enough. And Stenvor's eye flicked toward it. "You brought it back with you," he muttered. Sigrid nodded. "Then you owe it telling." She looked at Gunnar. He stood and began to speak. Not in drama, not in song, but in the way one speaks of wounds still clotting. He told of the execution, of the tongue in bark cloth, of the spiral, of Torbjörn. He did not say his name aloud. But the hall understood. Stenvor listened, said nothing. When the telling ended, he did not ask questions. He only poured more drink, then rose and left the room. When the others followed, they found him in the outer yard, kneeling in the snow. He was carving something into the side of the longhouse. A symbol, not Norse, not Biamian, something in between. The spiral, but with a tear through it. A slash of finality. He looked up. "My father raided that forest when I was a child," he said. "Returned with ivory, pelts, and a crushed hand. Said he fell. Said nothing more." Gunnar stepped closer. "Why did you mark the house?" Stenvor's face was gray in the moonlight. "Because they'll come." "For vengeance?" "No." He stood. "For barter." Sigrid's voice was a whisper. "They still trade?" Stenvor nodded. "Always, but not in the way we know. They do not forget. They do not forgive. But they do balance." He stepped past them and murmured over his shoulder, "Pray that what they bring is not memory." That night, Gunnar could not sleep. He walked to the edge of the village, past the watchposts, past the dung heaps and the herring sheds. The stars were clearer here. The wind was still. At the tree line, he stopped. Something stood there, not close, not threatening, just present. A tall figure, draped in black furs, antlers high against the sky. It didn't move, didn't vanish. It only raised a hand, palm outward, the same gesture. And Gunnar, hand clenched around the bone in his pocket, raised his hand in return. Not in greeting, not in surrender. In acceptance. The figure lowered its hand, and turned, and walked into the trees. Snow fell again, and for the first time since Torbjörn vanished, Gunnar closed his eyes, and rested. The village stirred in a different rhythm now. No morning shout. No goats bleat, no hammers clang. Even the crows seemed to watch rather than call. Smoke rose, thin and disciplined, from the longhouse hearths, and children stayed close to walls. Not from fear, not quite. From reverence. A word they didn't know, but felt like frost on skin. The spiral mark etched into the timber of the chieftain's hall had not faded. No snow clung to it, no soot dimmed it. Women passed it with a bowed glance, averted eyes, the way one skirts a buried curse. Gunnar watched from the slope above the west paddock, seated on a cold stone older than the village. The bone was still in his pocket. Still cool, still clean. Below, 2 dogs fought over a rib. Not a man's rib. Lamb. Bloodless. He looked out across the frost-thin pasture, where the trees began again in the distance. The edge of the white forest, a wall of pine and birch rising in a silence that hummed louder than war drums. Sigrid approached without sound. She sat beside him. Gunnar didn't turn. How many know what's behind those trees? More than speak it, she said. He ran a thumb along the spiral, now etched deeper into the bone. The grooves caught his skin like a whisper. Was it always like this? No, she said. It used to be worse. He frowned. They didn't judge before, only punished, quietly. But something changed. They watched too long. We forgot too much. He nodded. They gave warning now, she added. Signs, rights, mercy even. Not for our sake, for balance. A pause. Then, why me? She looked at him. You asked. He blinked. What? You looked at them and asked. You didn't scream, didn't kneel. You asked. Gunnar let out a slow breath, his chest rising with the weight of the mountain behind his ribs. I didn't ask to carry this. No, she said. But you didn't turn from it either. Behind them, a bell clanged once from the village square. Not for war, not for death, for gathering. They stood. At the base of the slope, the men and women of the village gathered in loose rings. Not tight, not disciplined. Circles of familiarity. Kin. Hearth-bound bonds. Håkon stood with Stenvor at the center. The priest from the old Friar Grove came forward, his beard braided with juniper. He spoke of passage, of returning the living to the rhythm of snow and soil, of not carrying the dead like shields. Then he stepped back, and Sigrid stepped forward. She held nothing in her hands. She wore no token of her house, no color of her kin, only black wool and fur, trimmed with small bones, not trophies, but threadbare. Reminders. Her voice was clear. We will not speak their names. Silence. Not from shame, not from guilt, but because their names are already written elsewhere. Eyes dropped. A child began to weep softly. Her mother hushed her. Sigrid continued. We do not bury this. We do not avenge this. We remember. Then she stepped aside, and the people placed stones in the center of the circle. Not carved, not ruined, just placed. One by one. Each person, a stone. Not for a grave, for weight, for memory. Gunnar stepped last. He did not place the bone. He placed his axe, not in surrender, not in guilt, but as offering. He stepped back, and did not take it up again. Later, after the firepots were lit and the mead brought low, Gunnar stood by the boundary marker where the southern trail broke away from the fjord path. Sigrid approached again, her breath showing in soft gusts, her cheeks pale from wind. They'll ask you to speak of this in the thing, she said. He nodded. I won't. She didn't object. They'll send others north, he added. In time. They always do. Gunnar turned to her. Will they be shown mercy? She shrugged. That depends. On what? She looked at the trees. On whether they bring iron. A long silence. Then Gunnar asked, what happens if the forest dies? If the pines fall? If men clear the trails, build timber roads? Sigrid's eyes narrowed. Then we will all forget what fear is, and the forgetting will be the last thing we do. That night, as the village fell into hush and ash, Gunnar left. No sled, no dogs, no steel. Only fur, water, a skin of broth, and the bone in his pocket. He walked west, not back toward the Biamians, not toward vengeance or curiosity, toward silence, toward somewhere the voice of men thinned, and the voice of stone and water thickened again. He passed the river, the old ridge, the clearing with the birch circle. No one followed, because no one could. At the mouth of a shallow cave, where the earth breathed cold and the wind sounded like wool being torn, Gunnar built a fire of dry pine needles and moss. No blaze, just ember, just warmth. He laid the bone in front of him, pressed his palm to the spiral, and listened. He did not expect an answer, and that is why he heard it. Not a voice, not a god, a rhythm. The same rhythm he had felt in the execution hollow, low, steady, like a heart too large to live in one chest. And he knew. What Vikings did to traitors was not the question. It never was. The question was, what is betrayal when the law is older than men? When the ground remembers? When the snow marks what was never spoken? He slept beside the fire, and when he woke, the bone was gone. But the spiral remained, etched into the frost beside him, still warm,